Hello my guys, it's time to grab yourself a snack, grab yourself a drink and strap in because I'm about to tell you about these 7 books that I read in January. Now, January was actually quite a good reading month for me, and I did only read 7 books, which I'm putting in quotation marks because I know that 7 is not a tiny amount by any means. It is slightly less than I typically used to read. If you've seen my stats video, then you'll know that last year wasn't a particularly great reading year for me. But typically before that, which is what I still consider my average, I was reading 8 to 12 books per month. That's where I'm comfortable. That's kind of what I want to be around. But the reason why I, once again in quotations, only read 7 books in January is because of these 7, 5 of them were over 500 pages. And 3 of those 5, I think, were over 600, with the biggest one being around 800 pages. So while I didn't read the most amount of books, I still read a substantial amount of pages because for some reason, pretty much everything I read was enormous. But before I reveal to you exactly what it was that I read in January and give you my thoughts and feelings, it is first time to cover the statistics. So in January, I read a total of 3,824 pages across 7 books, and that broke down to an average of 123 pages per day. For my star ratings, I have a new ethos for 2026 where I only want to read books that I'm actively either excited about or interested in, like have a genuine interest in. And I feel like that was reflected in the fact that I had no DNFs in January, but also that the star ratings were 3 stars, not amazing but not terrible, and 4 stars, breaking down to an average of 3.57 stars per book. For the demographics, it was just 7 adult books. For the formats, I read 4 ebooks, 2 standardly formatted novels, and I listened to 1 audiobook. For the genres, we had pretty much a straight split across all of my favorites. I read 2 fantasy books, 2 fantasy romance, 2 science fiction, and 1 romance. For the sources, if you guys saw my 2025 reading stats video, you will know that I'm mixing this up a little bit for 2026. So we're kind of splitting these sources down into 2 categories: where I actually sourced the books from, which is what this is supposed to be, and also how long they've been on my TBR, which is what this category kind of turned into. So for the places where I sourced the books that I read, 5 of them were ones that I bought new, 1 of them I got from Audible, and 1 was a book that was gifted to me. And because we're right at the beginning of the year, all 7 of these books are from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2026. 1 of them is just a digital book though. It's the audiobook that I got from Audible, and I don't know how to categorize those because technically I used the Audible credit to purchase the book before the start of the year, but I don't catalog or track my digital media in any specific way. So I don't know if we should have a separate section here for like own TBR, books that I've hauled this year, and then digital media. Let me know your thoughts down below. But the first book that I finished this year was one that I was carrying over from 2025. I did really want to get it in before the end of the year, but she's such a thick book. This is the one that is 800 pages. It's 818 to be exact, and that was The Light of All That Falls by James Islington, which is the final book in the Lycanius trilogy. So this concludes the first part of my reread and resume project, which I know I've been talking about it actually quite a lot recently, but if you don't know, the reread and resume project is a list of 10 series where I'd already read book 1 in the series, and I now want to reread that book so that I can continue on and actually finish it. And the Lycanius trilogy was the first series that I tackled for that project. I did not enjoy book 1 as much upon reread as I did the first time around, and I'll be honest, I did struggle a lot with this series. But this one is an adult epic fantasy that is set in a world where creatures with godlike abilities called Augurs used to rule the society. They formed the main part of the government because they had the ability to predict the future, and all of their prophecies came true. They were kind of all-knowing, which set them up to be the perfect rulers of this land. However, their predictions suddenly stopped coming into fruition, and instead of being transparent about this, they hid this from the general public and started like tightening restrictions to try and maintain control when their powers were failing. So because of this, the royal family who is made up of like regular people in this world, as well as like a lot of other influential people in society, rose up and they overthrew the Augurs and they killed them all. However, there are other magic wielders in this world called the Gifted who have a lesser ability than the Augurs. Their manifestation of magic tends to be more physical instead of mental, and so they were allowed to live under very tight restrictions where they have to attend schools, pass tests, and then live under very tight restrictions, aid in society with their abilities. So in here we are following a young man called Davian who thinks that he is a Gifted. However, his abilities aren't really manifested in the way that they should, and he can't use them. And he's worried about this because his trials are coming up, and if he fails the trials, then all of the power is going to be drained from him and he will become something called a shadow, which absolutely nobody wants. And one day somebody approaches him and tells him that he's actually an Augur, which is why he can't get a grip on the Gifted abilities. And this man hands him an artifact and sends him off north to use the artifact to repair a magical barrier that is holding all of the evil and the monsters of the world at bay. So Davian sets off on this quest with one of his best friends, and along the way they gather more people to them as they kind of unravel this plot and see that the corruption within their society and the actual core of what is going on runs a lot deeper than they originally expected. So I did enjoy book one, but this is a series that I would compare to Wheel of Time, and that is not a secret. Like, the Wheel of Time comparisons in this series are very obvious and very well known, but I would, because I do really like The Will of the Many by James Islington, which is one of my favorite books that I read in 2024, and I would compare this to like Wheel of Time meets Brandon Sanderson, whereas I would say like The Will of the Many is Red Rising meets Brandon Sanderson. And for me, this is a little bit too close to Wheel of Time. This almost takes a very small fragment of Wheel of Time that is mentioned, I think, for a couple of hundred pages in one book, and really fully fleshes it out and runs with the idea. It's kind of written in a similar style to Wheel of Time. It's not quite as repetitive and meandering, but it does have a little bit more of an aerial view. Like, one of my issues with this series is that I felt like I didn't really connect to the characters. Some of their perspectives were interesting, but overall I didn't really care about them that much, and so I felt like this series always had me at arm's length. Book two I did really struggle with, and for the longest time I wasn't loving book three either. However, unlike the Wheel of Time series, I do feel like, especially if you're already 2 books deep in this series like I was, because I was like 3/4 of the way through book three thinking I should have DNF'd this series. Like, I've read so much of this, I'm not having a good time, and I don't think anything can save this book for me right now. But let me tell you, this was worth it. The epilogue to this was perfect. It brought everything together. I obviously can't say anything about it, but some of the revelations that we had throughout the end of here really blew my mind. And even like ending this book before I got to the epilogue, being like, okay, like I enjoyed some parts of this, but I feel like there was a lot missing, and the way that that epilogue just brought everything together sealed the deal for me, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I will say as well, the epilogue of a book has never been my favorite. It's not a segment of a story that I feel like really does anything for me. Like, typically I find the epilogues are just like putting a bow on something, whereas James Islington's epilogues in every book that I've read by him I think is phenomenal. And I actually wasn't expecting very much from this one, with it being the end of a series, because I feel like his epilogues are normally very dynamic in a way that make you want to continue reading on. Obviously, when you're wrapping up a series, it's not going to have that same effect, so I wasn't expecting the most from this, but once again, James Islington's epilogue blew me away. I think that if you're fans of authors like Brandon Sanderson, if you're a Wheel of Time fan, then you will find a lot to love about this one. James Islington essentially writes sci-fantasy, so all of his stories, I would say, very much fit into the realm of fantasy very solidly, but they do all have a science fiction twist. This one dealt with time time travel and portals while still dealing with things like ancient prophecies and immortal creatures who are puppeteering everything that is happening. And we have like our band of plucky characters who are here to save the day. So I am glad that I read this one, especially because I did love The Will of the Many, and I'm very, very excited to get into The Strength of the Few. But I did expect this to be a 5-star series for me, and it did miss the mark a little bit on that. I then went in for a little bit of a palette cleanser with a cozy sci-fi, and I read A Psalm for the Wild Build by Becky Chambers, which was my Patreon pick for January, and I had a really good time with this. Y'all know I'm not a fan of cozy fantasy. Literally, like, I could care less. I'm never going to reach for a book because it says that it's cozy. It doesn't appeal to me, but there is something about Becky Chambers that is like a hug in a book. I've read everything from Becky Chambers now, aside from the sequels to this, like the second part of Monk and Robot, but I really love the way that she discusses societal concepts throughout all of her work, and this was no different. So this one is following a tea monk. They don't start as a tea monk, actually. They are a monk in the big city, and they realize one day that they've never heard cricket song. This is not a sound that is normal in modern society. We're essentially set at a time on Earth somewhere in the future where there has been a robot age where robots essentially replaced humans in most ways, and eventually the humans kind of, I don't want to say rose up against it because I don't know for sure that it was this kind of rebellion thing, but essentially it resulted in all of the robots leaving into the wilderness. So now it's a much more natural society, and the wilderness has been allowed to reclaim the cities, and humans finally live in harmony with nature. Obviously we've undergone some almost apocalyptic conditions to get to this point, and crickets don't really exist anymore. So our main character decides to become a tea monk because they want to get out into the communities. They feel like they need a change in calling, and in doing so they want to use that opportunity to travel to find cricket song. But no matter what they do or where they go, they realize that they're still too close to civilization to be able to find these crickets, who are almost extinct at that point. And along the way on their journey they encounter a robot called Mosscap. Now, the conditions with which the robots left was that they can rejoin society at any time, but it has to be the robot's choice, not humanity. So Mosscap is coming back to humanity just to check in, and when they meet Dex, they ask them, what does humanity need? What does humanity want? Are humans okay since we've left them? And Dex, being one singular person, is not equipped to answer this question, but they agree to accompany the robot into the villages and communities that they've been traveling as a tea monk if the robot first accompanies them off into the wilderness where it's no longer recommended that humans go because it's all overgrown and dangerous, in search of cricket sounds. This deals heavily with themes of ennui and living in an idealistic society, having everything you need, everything that you want, people who love you, a vocation that at least used to speak to you, and still wanting more, which is what Dex is really struggling with throughout this. And overall, the feeling of being ungrateful for what they have because they can't seem to be happy with it. And it also deals with the misconceptions that different beings have about each other, and specifically the way that Dex has to challenge their own prejudice after they meet this robot. So this is like an adventure story. I did think it was going to be like a sit-down discussion kind of thing, but it's these two kind of getting to know each other better, Mosscap learning more about the humans and where they're at now, while Dex is learning about robots and setting all of their prejudices aside as they journey together to hunt down the cricket song. The thing that I really love about Becky Chambers is that they present idealistic societies somewhat. There's usually an issue that is still unresolved, but so many of these societal issues that we have today, so many of the difficulties that people seem to have in accepting and loving each other, don't exist in Becky Chambers' books. And these societies are laid out so simply that it is a wonder to me that this is still something that we struggle with in our everyday society, when it can be so easy to accept and love and provide for everybody without anybody else having to suffer for other people to have that privilege and that benefit. And I feel like Becky Chambers' books really make me think in that regard about concepts that honestly have never even entered my mind. And also their books are so filled of things like love and acceptance, which is why I feel like they produce this feeling to me of being a hug in a book. I did also really like the humor in here and the banter between Dex and Mosscap, and I'm quite eager to continue on and read the second part of this very soon, because it is obviously just a novella duology, and I think it's like essentially just a direct continuation of this, so it would be best if I could pick up this sometime soon so that I don't lose the thread of the story. I am doing better with finishing series in January than I did pretty much for the entirety of 2025, because I also finished John Gwynn's Blood and Bone series, which is what we were currently reading for Catch Up Book Club. We are going to be moving on to John Gwynn's Bloodsworn Saga, which is a trilogy that is not connected to any of the books that we've read previously. If you guys want to get involved, I'll link the announcement video for you. But this is a conclusion to what we have in the Banished Lands so far. So this series specifically is a spin-off to the Faithful and the Fallen series, set 100 to 150 years after the conclusion of that 4-book series. So the original series deals with a prophecy that was made by giants many years before the start of the series, because giants don't exist in the world anymore. And the prophecy said that there was going to be an avatar of light and an avatar of dark, and the whole world was going to divide and split between them to fight for good and evil, and one of them would win. So that is essentially the plot. Like, we get into the nitty-gritty and it's more of like a character-driven story, I would say, but that is the plot of The Faithful and the Fallen. And in the Of Blood and Bone series, we are dealing with the resolution of the aftermath of The Faithful and the Fallen. So not everything went exactly to plan, and that has resulted in some issues with the leadership and the people in power in this world. So this is a multi-perspective series. We don't follow more than 4 to 5 characters, I'm pretty sure, per book in this one, where we have tons of characters in The Faithful and the Fallen. But the main problem that we're dealing with is that the way that the world is being run is not in line with the way that the general citizens of the world would like to live. So we question in this one what is really good and what is really evil, and we also have some bubblings in the background of the, in quotation marks, the true evil of this world that we're also dealing with in tandem with trying to overthrow the people currently in power and root out that corruption. So I will say, to start us off, this is my least favorite John Gwynn book that I've read, but I have massively enjoyed the majority of my time in the Banished Lands, and so I gave this one 3.5. It's not like a low rating by any means, but in the ranking of all 7 books that I've read so far, it is my least favorite. And the reason for that is that while this is stronger in some regards in comparison to The Faithful and the Fallen, there are things that I feel The Faithful and the Fallen does better than the Of Blood and Bone series, and the things that The Faithful and the Fallen does better are things that are more appealing to me as a reader. So I think that this one definitely has a stronger, tighter, more concise plot than The Faithful and the Fallen. We have tons of characters in that series, and the books are a lot thicker. There's 4 books as opposed to 3, and it can be a little bit more long-winded and drawn out. However, I feel like what we have sacrificed in this trilogy to make it tighter, more concise, more cohesive is character attachment for me, because I'm not seeing characters in those slow moments. So what that resulted in this final book for me is a lot of, shall we say, battle scenes that I wasn't super invested in, because I wasn't as invested in who lived and died in this series. There were a couple of things that got me very slightly emotional, but overall there was no casualty of this series that I am overly upset about. Actually, there was one in this series, but it was in book 1. And since then, or was there 2 in book 1? There were 2 that made me slightly emotional, but essentially anything that happened kind of as the result of the final battle didn't really impact me that emotionally. John Gwynn himself does participate in like historical battle reenactment, so he does get really into the nitty-gritty of the fight scenes, and I feel like with this one being the conclusion of a series, we obviously did have a lot of battle, battle, a lot of opposing sides coming together and declaring a winner up until we got to our final fight scene of this book. And that one I loved. Like, typically not a massive fan of battle scenes. I can find myself zoning out a lot of the time. There's only a couple of instances where I feel that battle scenes have been done really well. The ones in the Mistborn series, the first era by Brandon Sanderson, I absolutely love because of the way that the powers play into them. And also I really loved the one at the end of Wrath because I thought that it was so cinematic. And once again, the final battle scene that we had in here, I found to be incredibly cinematic. It had a level of, I don't want to say ease to it because I wouldn't say it was an easy battle, but I felt like the way that everyone came together with powers and skills and abilities that were perfectly matched to work in conjunction to take down the bad guy was like something out of a movie. And not in a bad way because I very much enjoyed it, but it did very much feel like, I don't know, I'm not a Marvel girly, but I imagine it's kind of how you would feel when the Avengers assembled. It's what I was getting from the end of this, and I was loving it. I was rooting for everyone. I was scared, like it was high action, and I was super invested, but that for me doesn't necessarily offset the battle scenes that we had at the beginning of the book that I was definitely less invested in. I was a little bit worried about this one in terms of the scope of the plot of the trilogy, and I was like, I don't know how, because throughout books 1 and 2 we're adding components to the plot, and I'm like, I don't know how we're going to bring all of these to a close, because the first 2 books in this series I think are around like bang on 500 pages. They might be slightly under, and this one is 640, and I feel like the scope of the plot in this trilogy is actually more ambitious than The Faithful and the Fallen. So I did not know how we were going to be able to bring this to a close. I do feel like John Gwynne did a very good job at that. I feel like I would have maybe liked 100 more pages, kind of bring in some of these elements to a close, because I did feel like we had a little bit of a jump towards the end. But overall I was very satisfied with how we wrapped this one up. The only kind of, not criticism exactly, but the only thing stopping me from giving like the majority of the Banished Lands books 5 stars is that I feel like the magic system is not integrated into this series in a way that serves me best as a reader, shall we say. So this magic system has an origin, like it originates from the time of giants, and I think it's called like the earth magic. For all intents and purposes, the magic in this world just is. There is a law to it, there are rules, but they're never really explained to us. Like, we always seem to be more heavily focused on the warrior characters than we are on the magic wielders. I feel like we could really benefit if John Gwynne revisits this world with following the perspective of somebody who is highly skilled in the magic, so that we get a deeper understanding of the magic, because that is something that to me, like, a magic is a science, and it has laws and it has rules and it has origins, and I know that all of these things exist within this world, but they're never really explained. And we did have a big resurgence of magic towards the end of this series, with some developments as well that I think I would have appreciated us delving into a little bit more. And overall, I would just like to see more about the magic system in this world, if I'm being honest. But that is coming from somebody who wants to know the whys and the hows of everything when I'm reading, especially in a fantastical world. I'm also very sad to say that I have disappointed us all, because I have finally found a full-length Ali Hazelwood book that I did not give 5 stars to. My unblemished Ali Hazelwood record has finally come to an end, and I knew that this day was coming eventually, because that's just how probability works, but I'm sad that we're there already. And the book in question that I read in January was, of course, Deep End. And just to clarify, I still thoroughly enjoyed this one. It just didn't quite hit 5 stars for me because of certain elements that we will discuss. So this is one of Ali Hazelwood's spicier books. All of her books have some element of spice, but this one focuses more on a physical relationship between our characters from earlier on in the story, because in this one we are following a diver and a swimmer. Our female main character is Scarlett, and she is the diver. She is currently recovering from a diving injury, and while she's like mostly physically recovered, she is struggling to kind of get her form back and perform at a professional level once again. And our swimmer is Lucas, and he is an Olympic medalist. They are both at Stanford and they're both pre-med students. When this story starts out, Lucas is dating Scarlett's friend Penelope. Scarlett has had a little bit of a difficult childhood. She lived with an abusive man for a very long time, and this has had a very deep effect on her. She doesn't like loud noises. She doesn't feel comfortable around men in general, but especially like groups of men, which is something that Lucas picks up on very, very quickly. But it has also left her with a lot of insecurity, a lot of feeling like she's not good enough, she's not a good enough student, she's not a good enough diver, she's not hot enough for Lucas, she's not cool enough to have the friends that she does. And this is something that really permeates her narrative and influences like every element of her life. So she's not somebody who's ever had a lot of friends. A lot of the friendships that she has in this book are ones that are in very tentative stages right at the beginning. But one of the people that she's kind of acquainted with is Penelope, who is dating Lucas. And she witnesses Penelope and Lucas having a discussion about breaking up, and they've been together for the last like 4 or 5 years. But she talks to Penelope and discovers the reason why they're breaking up is because Lucas is into some kinkier activities in the bedroom than she is, shall we say. And Scarlett, who is also into some kinkier activities, talks to Penelope to see if she can give any advice to kind of resolve the problems that they're having. And Penelope's like, no, you know what, like this relationship's run its course. Like, I'm sure we'll find our way back to each other eventually because we've known each other so long, but I'm okay to date other people and do the things that I'm comfortable with and have some fun. So one day when they're at a party, Penelope is like so drunk and Scarlett and Lucas are trying to help her out, and she's like, oh my god, you know what, you guys should hook up because you two are into the same stuff. And I'll clarify, the same stuff that they're into is a little bit of BDSM. They both like a sub-dom kind of relationship. Scarlett likes to be submissive because she feels like she can be free of making decisions and overthinking, and the kind of lack of control makes her feel like she can be more comfortable and have more fun. And Lucas does like to be in a dominant role. So like, to be fair to Penelope, they are perfectly suited to each other, and those two start to explore this relationship throughout the course of the book, which is why we focus on a physical aspect of their relationship a lot sooner than we typically do in Ali Hazelwood books. The sexual tension between these two I actually really enjoyed, with this being a little on the kinkier side than things I'd read from Ali Hazelwood before. I didn't know if it was going to work for me because in literature it sometimes does and it sometimes doesn't, but I did like the way that it was portrayed through the sexier scenes in this book. I just felt like, for me, the dynamic outside of the bedroom was lacking a little bit, and I love me a character that is a simp. All Ali Hazelwood love interest, like the male main characters, they're all simps. I just feel like Lucas was a little too down bad, and to be fair, it wasn't him that was the problem. It was Scarlett's narrative of being so down on herself all the time, which I don't fault her for, and I completely understand given her background. But what this meant in terms of the relationship dynamic is that it wasn't that she was oblivious to the fact that Lucas was into her, it's that she didn't want to accept it because she found herself lacking. And so to me, to the reader, it's glaringly obvious that this is going to be a thing. It's just that Scarlett is not ready to accept it yet. And for me, that removed a little bit of the tension within the relationship, because the conflict or the things that were keeping them apart almost didn't exist, because it was more of a mindset than it was any kind of physical obstacle. And I felt like that just broke up that tension and chemistry a little bit for me. The other reason, and the main reason I think why this wasn't a 5-star for me though, is that we have a third wheel in this relationship, and the way that the characters coddled this person throughout the entirety of this book irritated me endlessly. I did not think that their behavior was appropriate. I thought that they were spoiled. I thought that they were acting entitled. And instead of the characters kind of calling them out on this, they actually babied them the entire time. And I understand why our main character did, because she's not somebody who is, like I said, used to having a lot of people in her life that actually care about her. So when she builds connections with people, she wants to preserve them at all costs. And she's quite a shy person. She doesn't think that she's good enough, so she's not comfortable or confident enough to assert herself. So it made perfect sense why she was always like stepping down and like putting this person first. But for our love interest, he is a strong and silent type. He's private and he's reserved, but there was no point throughout this book where he didn't say what needed to be said at the time that it needed to be said, unless it related to this character. Like if, for example, if Scarlett was uncomfortable because his swimming team were just being a little too loud, and they weren't doing anything malicious, but like obviously he can tell that she's uncomfortable, he would be like, guys, can you just like quiet it down a little bit and like chill? So he had no issue kind of advocating for himself and advocating for Scarlett, unless it applied to this one person. And the way that their dynamic, this other person and Lucas, the way that that was established throughout the entirety of this book, it made no sense to me that he would be so tentative about stepping on their feelings or drawing any boundaries based on the way that he discussed them to Scarlett. So that was kind of my disconnect with this one. I still very much enjoyed it. It had a lot of the typical Ali Hazelwood dynamic, although I wouldn't say it's a grumpy sunshine pairing, which Ali Hazelwood is very, very good at, and it's what I've loved from Ali Hazelwood. It does still have things like the he falls first trope, which I always come to expect from Ali Hazelwood, and a lot of the hallmarks that I've enjoyed from her in the past. There was just a couple of things that didn't work for me, and the main thing was that I was so irritated by that third character that it kind of ruined my enjoyment of this one a little bit, because my feelings when I was reading it was irritation, not joy or anticipation or any of the things that I expect to feel while reading a romance. I was mainly just annoyed. I then read a book that I've been anticipating for quite some time, and it started off strong, but unfortunately it lost my interest a little bit in the middle, and that is very sadly The Book of Azrael by Amber V. Nicole. So this is a book that I had signed and personalized to me at Rare, and we all know that I never like these books. If I get them signed, I've actually stopped having books personalized, especially like if I haven't read them, because if it's like a curse. It's like if you put my name in the book, I'm not going to enjoy the book. And Amber Nicole was so lovely as well. I'm actually gutted about this one, especially because it did start so strong. But this one is an urban fantasy following a woman who is near on immortal. I don't know if she's actually immortal, but she's lived at this point for I think around 1,000 years. And this is set in a universe where there were multiple worlds, and two of the worlds like either collided or crossed over, and the beings from one world came into the world that our main character lives in, and with them they brought all of the strange bacteria from their world that the citizens of this planet were not suited to deal with. And so this caused a plague, and the plague claimed the parents of our main character. So she made a deal with a monster to save her sister's life. So they've both been granted this immortality, and the main character has become this monster's second, where she is one of the generals of his armies and she has to do whatever he says. And one of the things he's tasked her with doing is collecting the Book of Azrael, which is this fabled book created by a godlike creature. So she, I think they're called elementals, the godlike creatures in here, but she essentially encounters a group of them trying to find the book, and one of them kills themselves to bring their god back to Earth, and she is blamed for the death, and she kind of rolls with it because she wants them to think that she's super powerful and capable of killing one of them. They're kind of like angels, and this god comes down and tells her that Azrael died a long time ago, like he saw his body, there's no way this book exists, and that she is on a fruitless mission anyway, but it doesn't matter because he's going to kill her for her crimes against his people. She eventually makes a bargain with this god that if he protects her sister, who is constantly held over her head when it comes to this monster and essentially used to keep her in line, but if he protects her sister, doesn't hold her over her head, and doesn't attribute their actions to each other, and also allows her to live a normal life without constantly being threatened, then she will switch teams and help him find the Book of Azrael before her old master does so. So they team up, go on this quest to find this book, while they're also kind of being hunted down by the monster and his minions. So this is an urban fantasy, and that is what I enjoyed about it the most, because Old urban fantasy, I've had a lot of issues with in the past. We know I don't typically enjoy it, but new urban fantasy that is kind of those same stories but blended with epic fantasy a little bit, and also with like more modern main characters and relationships, I have really been enjoying, like Crescent City, like The Deer and the Dragon by Piper CJ, and also Terror at the Gates by Scarlett St. Clair. And going into this book very much fit that vibe, and I was thrilled. It was in depth. We had this backstory of like the worlds colliding and the plague that had formed like the basis of this story, as well as the like angels versus the monsters, or the gods versus the monsters, and the way that that tied into like the history of the world and the way it was all coming to fruition in this like pretty modern urban landscape with a badass main character who was really powerful, not afraid to do terrible things for the people that she loved, but also kind of like had a desire to do a little bit more and be a little bit better. And I sunk into this immediately. It was so compelling and I was having a great time. But when the love interest was introduced, they obviously don't like each other, okay? They're from opposite sides of this war. She is a monster, he is a god, like literally mortal enemies forever. And they behaved like it for a little while, and even when she made it clear like she's switching sides, she's on his team now, he was obviously a little bit trepidatious about accepting her help, and rightfully so. It makes a lot of sense. But then obviously knowing that this was going to progress into a place where this guy was the love interest, the tides are obviously going to turn and they're not going to feel that way about each other forever. However, I felt like that transition was instantaneous. It was like they had one discussion one time where they shared a little bit of trauma, and then from that point they had a soft spot for each other, which eventually like blossomed into something more. And I just feel like that transitionary period was literally like the flick of a switch. It wasn't slow. I couldn't feel their feelings start to change. It just wasn't, and then it was, and that completely threw me. And from that point on, I kind of lost all immersion that I had in this story. In terms of the relationship as well, I didn't really feel like they had any chemistry, and so I wasn't particularly engaged in the romantic half of this story. And as we get into this kind of traveling portion of the book, which is actually the majority of the book, obviously you have a lot of one-on-one time between these two, where it's focusing kind of more on how their relationship develops while everything else is going on around them, as it is really on the plot. And because I wasn't really vibing with that part of the story, I lost a lot of interest, and the ending of this book sadly could not turn it around for me. So this one was like a very low 3-star rating. I feel like if you're a fan of urban fantasy, I would actually really recommend that you pick this one up, because I do feel like if that relationship would have worked for me, if I was invested in it at all, then I would be very excited to continue on with this series. So I think if that relationship does work for you, then you could very much enjoy this series. And I think in terms of the plot and the world building, there's a lot to love about this one. Another highly anticipated romance for me was Quicksilver by Callie Hart. And I've heard a lot of mixed opinions on this one, but I did have faith that I was going to love this. And sadly I did not, but I did enjoy it a lot. So this one is set in a world that feels very reminiscent to things that I've read before, but also a little bit different. And I think that's why I immediately sunk into this one. I found it very compelling. But it's set in this city where the layout is kind of like spokes, or like the numbers on a clock, and each area is walled off, and in the middle is where the queen lives, and our main character lives in, I think it's like the third area of this city, which is where they send the people who have the plague. Like they're very poor there, but there's actually no illness there. They're actually dissenters, or people who have dangerous ideas, and so they're heavily restricted and heavily punished. This is a desert environment, and they have like a daily water ration, and the water itself is contaminated, so they are actually, to be fair, quite unwell, and they're also not very strong. Like they're continuously being suppressed so that they can't have any dangerous ideas that may overthrow the queen. However, one day our main character, who is a little bit of a thief, she also works in a forge, but she steals a gauntlet from one of the queen's guard, and she takes that into her area, and the guards very quickly come and hunt her down and take her to the queen. The queen essentially wants her executed, so she sends her guard to do so, and the main character fighting for her life, she sees this like sword stuck in the ground. So she picks it up and she turns it, and this opens a Quicksilver portal into a different dimension, and a big Fae warrior comes through, scoops her up and takes her back to the Fae realm, and the portal closes behind her. So when she gets to the land of the Fae, she discovers that she is an alchemist, and the alchemists died out like 1,000 years ago, maybe more, and so she must be like a very diluted descendant of them that is now mortal. So she has like a drop of Fae blood. However, the queen of the land that she came from, who weirdly is immortal, even though she is mortal, but she's not, you know, she's like a human, but she's immortal, and nobody really knows why, but she is the one who stuck the sword in the portals to close them all forever, and that has caused the realm of the Fae to be trapped, and the supply lines are all closed off. So they want our main character to hone her alchemist powers so that she can reinstate the portals and therefore the supply lines between realms. And while she's there, she's getting close to this guy who's called Kingfisher, and he is not doing so well, because if you travel through a Quicksilver portal without a talisman, you absorb some of the Quicksilver, and it talks to you, it whispers, and it sends you slowly mad. So he has talismans that are kind of holding back the Quicksilver within his body, that the healers, after he traveled through a Quicksilver portal many years ago, the healers tried to draw the Quicksilver out and they couldn't. And our main character, being an alchemist, is also wondering whether she can do anything about the Quicksilver that is affecting Kingfisher. Now, I really liked the pacing and the tone of this. Like I said, it was instantly compelling. I found it so easy to sink into, and I think the fact that it felt very reminiscent of probably like young adult fantasy as well as romantasy that I've read and enjoyed in the past, but we had this new element. I mean, the Fae portals in the human world, that's not massively revolutionary, but I think it was the magic system with the Quicksilver that I really enjoyed, that I thought added a little spark of something new to this world. And I also really liked the addition of the mercury poisoning that was essentially happening in here when it comes to Kingfisher, because of course Quicksilver is what we now commonly refer to as mercury, and increased exposure to mercury does start to affect the old brain. So I liked how Callie Hart obviously tied that little scientific nugget into the magic system in here. The things that I didn't like so much about this book was mainly the romantic relationship. I thought Kingfisher was going to be my man, and this man is not my man. I felt like a lot of the romantic interactions in here came from nowhere, and I am a big fan of tension. I take the sexual tension over the sex. Like, that is what I live for. Like, if you guys just graze palms for 600 pages, sign me up. That is what has me thriving. And I just felt like every romantic interaction they had, literally they were having a normal conversation and then they were going at it, and I was like, I don't understand how we ended up here. This feels really sudden. But the way that the smut was written in here felt very uncomfortable to me, and also almost violent. And I know that violent is a very extreme word, and I don't mean it to that extreme, but I felt like Callie Hart was going for your typical like dominant, overbearing, like slightly rough romance hero, and it did just come across as aggressive to me, and I don't know how to describe it, because I know that this is a common complaint that a lot of people have with the romantasy genre, that the male main characters are overly dominant, they're predatory, the sex scenes are unrealistic, and once again bordering on aggression. And I completely understand why people would think that. And I also have enjoyed multitudes of romantasy books with heroes and with smut like that in the past, but there's something about the way that it was written specifically in this book that I found very jarring and also very uncomfortable. There was something in here that was compared to like hammers hitting an ice surface, which is a scene that happens in the book, and like she compares the way that like a certain interaction is happening to hammers hitting the ice of a surface. There's also lots of words in here like thrusting, but like in relation to hands, and it just all felt very uncomfortable to me, and I did not enjoy it. I felt like the whole romantic relationship fell flat for me. I really enjoyed the first half, and I think the 50 to 80% mark, I was thinking like, I'm not enjoying this anymore. I don't really want to continue with this series. And I will say I really like the way that the plot played out in the last 20%, and that has left me wanting to continue, but I feel like I just have to accept that I'm in here for the compelling writing style, the fact that I like the world and the magic system, and I'm intrigued by the plot, and the whole relationship between Kingfisher and Sirius really just does not do anything for me. I will say as well, in terms of the kind of tropes and plot points that are, I mean, within the plot, it's not the most unique plot that I've ever read. A lot of the stuff that happened, especially in the last third of this book, I've definitely read before, but specifically the plot points within the romantic relationship, I've read them literally 1,000 times, and there's nothing about the ones done in this specific book that made them stand out from the rest. So yeah, the romance in this is not for me, but everything else about this I actually did really enjoy, so I do want to continue. My original plan, and the reason why I wanted to read this so soon, is because there's a lot of shops that have like half price deals on the metallic edged editions of book 1 and 2 of this series. So I was like, well, if I like this, I can get both of the books for the price of one. I didn't enjoy this enough to have like a special edition of it. I would actually really like a paperback, but I haven't even seen a release date for that, which is wild because this hardback was published in 2024. So I think for Brimstone, I'm going to look for like a 99p deal or wait for the paperbacks because I'm not that invested. I'm not invested enough to invest real money into this series, but there was things that I loved and things that I really didn't like about this one. And then the last book that I finished was one that I started in either October or November. It has been a long ass time, and that is The Gate of the Feral Gods by Matt Dinniman, which is book 4 in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. Now, the main reason why I have taken so long to read this is not because of the book itself, it's because I just haven't really been listening to audiobooks. I feel like sometimes the moods that I'm in greatly influence the way that I read, and I just really haven't wanted to pick up an audiobook for a while. And I also haven't been doing a lot of like audiobook activities. All my physical reads have been taking precedence, but I actually think that this is one of my favorite installments in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series so far. That being said though, I still do not love this series the way a lot of people do. I don't know what I'm missing, but I don't seem to have the overwhelming love and obsession for this series that a lot of people really have. But essentially this is a lit RPG series, which means that it's like a fantasy sci-fi series that mimics the conventions of the role-playing genre of video games like Fallout, The Elder Scrolls, World of Warcraft, all that jazz. This is following a man called Carl, and he's smoking a cigarette out of the window one day, and his girlfriend's, or his ex-girlfriend should I say, cat jumps out of the window. And so he goes out in his underwear in the middle of a winter storm to retrieve this cat, and all of the buildings on Earth collapse into the ground. This ethereal voice comes out of the ether and essentially tells Carl that they are now going to be participating in this intergalactic game, and he has the choice of trying to survive on the planet without any resources, without any buildings, or he can go into these staircases that have opened underground and join this game show. So he is literally out in his underwear with his cat under his arm, and he doesn't think that he is equipped to survive on the surface of planet Earth. So he decides to enter the dungeon, where he becomes a contestant in this game show, and it is like a dungeon crawler game. It's like an RPG, and the cat, Princess Donut, also becomes a contestant in the games and is also gifted with the ability to speak. So it's these two traversing the dungeon. Book 1 covers the first 2 levels. I think there's like 15 levels of the dungeon. Book 1 covers the first 2, and then every book after that so far has covered a new level. So I've just completed level 5 at the end of book 4. I enjoy this series mainly for its entertainment factor. I think, because I've been listening to the audiobooks obviously, I think that the audio performance is phenomenal. As far as I'm aware, it's just one guy who does all of the voices. There's also sound effects which helps to bring it to life. So I find that it's a really immersive, entertaining audio experience, and it's definitely funny. The humor does not always work for me. I have discussed there's at least one really irritating sexist thing in every book that I've read in this series so far, and it annoys me because it's unnecessary, and it's always like the butt of a joke, like a throwaway comment that just didn't need to be there, you know? So I definitely have my issues with this series, but I think that the entertainment factor is what is keeping me going. As I said, The Gate of the Feral Gods is probably my favorite installment, or in line with book one, because I always love book one of a series, you know? But obviously as we're going down, the levels become more and more in-depth and intricate, whereas the first book was more just learning the mechanics of the game and also the way, like the structure, the story style, I feel like we were adjusting to in book one. We're now getting into more intricate, complex levels of the dungeon, which is a little bit more interesting, as long as they're not super convoluted like they were in book three. So I definitely enjoyed that. I love Princess Donut, of course. She is the highlight of this series, and I love the relationship that Carl and Donut have, and the banter back and forth is one of my favorite elements. But I do think that this series for me is more of like entertaining immersion than it is like one of my new favorite series of all time. So I gave The Gate of the Feral Gods 4 stars. I am going to be continuing. I am going to be taking a little bit of a break though, because I have an arc of Operation Bounce House by Matt Dinniman for early February that I very much would like to get to very soon. And I'm also going to listen to a couple of other audiobooks that are coming up in my TBR before I get back into DCC. But like I said, I am happy to continue and I am having a good time, but I think a good time is the extent of my involvement with this series, if that makes any sense. So these, plus The Gate of the Feral Gods, are all of the books that I read in January. In February, I'm hoping for some slightly smaller books, because I know I said 5 of the books that I read were over 500 pages. The text size in this one's almost 600. And the text size in it is minuscule. So the actual content you got in here, if it had an actual comfortable text size, would be over 600 pages. And the Ali Hazelwood book that I read for contemporary romance, it was huge. It was 450 pages. And my sweet spot with contemporary romance is like 300 to 400. So Ali Hazelwood was pushing my boundaries with that one, but I'll allow it because she is, of course, my favorite contemporary romance author. The book that I'm currently reading is also over 600 pages. And I actually don't know exactly what I'm diving into next, but looking at my TBR, nothing is all that small. So maybe we're gonna have another pile of really thick books for February. But you guys know me, most of the time the bigger the book the better, so I can't really complain about it. But down in my comments, let me know what your favorite book that you read in January was. I think of my 7, my favorite, it's hard because I think my favorite book is the one that I didn't quite finish in January, but of these ones, that's really hard. Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. I loved the ending of The Light of All That Falls, but that doesn't negate like how much I struggled through the beginning. I think I'm gonna go with The Deep End. I really don't feel like there's an outright winner this month that I loved above the rest of them. But if you guys would like to let me know you were here but you don't feel like you have anything to say, please leave me a butterfly emoji for Quicksilver. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, my Instagram, and my Patreon if you want to follow me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're go and nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.